Hey everyone, and welcome to Whisper Bloom. Tonight, we're setting sail on a journey not just across the vast, blue ocean, but into the minds of ancient mariners. Imagine yourself there, a young, eager recruit, stepping onto a creaking wooden deck for the very first time. You might think, oh, the romance of the sea. But trust me, without knowing a few tricks, you might not survive the first week, of sheer boredom, that is. If you enjoy tonight's story, please remember to like and subscribe to our podcast so you won't miss a single one of our bedtime escapes. We'd also love for you to share your city, current time, and how you're feeling in the comments below. Now, take a deep breath, relax your body and mind, let all your thoughts drift away, and get ready to join us for story time. You stand on the bow, the salt spray kissing your face, the wind whipping through your hair. The scent of tar and brine fills your nostrils, a heady mix of adventure and the unknown. Below you, the waves churn and foam, a restless, living thing stretching out to an impossibly distant horizon. This is it. Your first true voyage. You've heard the old tales, of mythical beasts, of storms that could swallow ships whole, of exotic lands brimming with unimaginable riches. Your heart thrums with a mixture of excitement and a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of fear. Around you, the ship is a hive of activity. Seasoned sailors, their faces weathered like old leather, move with a practiced efficiency, hoisting sails, coiling ropes, their movements economical and sure. You watch them, trying to mimic their ease, feeling clumsy and out of place in your stiff new canvas trousers. Old Jack, a grizzled veteran with a twinkle in his eye and a perpetually half-chewed piece of tobacco, claps you on the shoulder. First time, lad. His voice is rough, like sandpaper, but kind. Don't worry, the sea has a way of sorting out those who belong. You nod, a lump forming in your throat. He gestures to the seam. Endless expanse of water. She's a cruel mistress, but she'll teach you things no landlubber could ever dream of. The ship groans and creaks as it pulls away from the bustling docks, the cheers of the onlookers fading into the distance. The shoreline shrinks, houses becoming specks, then disappearing entirely. You're truly alone now, surrounded by nothing but the vast, boundless ocean and a handful of men you barely know. For the first few days, every moment is new. You learn to brace yourself against the rolling deck, to climb the rigging without looking down, to distinguish the myriad sounds of the ship at sea. The vastness of the ocean is awe-inspiring, the sunsets painting the sky in fiery hues you never imagined possible. You feel a profound sense of freedom, a connection to something ancient and powerful. This is what you dreamed of. This is why you signed up. The initial days are a whirlwind of discovery, of adapting to a new rhythm, a new world. You're busy, you're learning, you're constantly taking in new sights and sounds. The idea of boredom seems as distant as the land you've left behind. You're living the dream, breathing the salty air, and feeling the powerful sway of the ship beneath your feet as it glides further and further into the unknown. The initial wonder, like a sugary rush, begins to wear off. Days melt into weeks, and the boundless ocean, once a source of endless fascination, slowly transforms into a monotonous expanse of blue. You wake to the same creaking timbers, the same rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, the same faces, day in and day out. The vastness that once inspired awe now feels suffocating, an endless, featureless canvas. This is where the true test begins, not against a raging storm or a kraken from the deep, but against the insidious creep of boredom. Your duties quickly become rote. You haul ropes, swab decks, stand watch, each task a repetition of the last. The sun rises and sets with predictable regularity, painting the sky in beautiful but increasingly familiar hues. You start to notice the tiny imperfections in the wooden planks beneath your feet, the subtle shifts in the wind that once seemed so complex now feel like old friends. The conversations, once animated with tales of home and dreams of fortune, dwindle to grunts and sighs. The initial excitement of learning gives way to the dull ache of routine. You find yourself staring at the horizon for hours, searching for anything at all, to break the monotony, a distant sail, a breach of a whale, even just a flock of birds. But often, there is nothing. Just water and sky, merging in an indistinguishable line. Old Jack, ever observant, catches you sighing for the 10th time that morning as you scrub the same section of deck. He leans on his broom, his eyes twinkling. Getting a bit long in the tooth, lad? He rasps, a knowing smile playing on his lips. You grunt in agreement, too tired to even fake enthusiasm. He continues, the sea, she'll lull you into a stupor if you let her. That's why we find ways. Always find ways. He gestures vaguely around the ship, where other sailors are performing their tasks with similar expressions of weary resignation. This phenomenon, the soul-crushing boredom of long voyages, was a universal challenge for sailors across millennia. Think about it, no internet, no books for entertainment for most, no quick port stops. Just you, your ship, and the vast, empty ocean for weeks, months, or even years on end. It's a common historical knowledge point that scurvy was a major killer on long voyages, but the mental toll of isolation and tedium was just as real, if less dramatically fatal in the short term. The psychological impact of prolonged confinement and sensory deprivation could lead to profound despair, what some modern psychologists might even liken to a form of situational depression. You begin to understand what old Jack means. The fresh air, once invigorating, now feels relentless. The constant rocking of the ship, once novel, now induces a perpetual state of mild queasiness. You long for the solid ground, for the smell of fresh earth, for the simple act of walking in a straight line without swaying. The days stretch out, seemingly endless, each one a mirror of the last. You realize that the true battle on these voyages isn't just against storms or starvation, it's a constant, silent war against the mind's tendency to wander into the abyss of nothingness. This subtle shift from awe to apathy is a universal truth of long-distance travel, whether by sea, land, or even, perhaps, through the cosmos. Historians still debate the exact psychological terminology for what sailors experienced, but the evidence of its impact is clear in their desperate search for any distraction, any tiny spark to ignite a moment of interest in the vast, unchanging blue. With the endless horizon stretching out, the human mind, in its infinite ingenuity, desperately seeks ways to fill the void. And what better way to do that than with a bit of friendly competition and the thrill of a small wager? You soon discover that the ship, despite its cramped quarters, transforms into a makeshift casino and game hall after duties are done. Dice become a universal currency of entertainment. Simple, portable, and requiring little space, they are perfect for the confines of a rocking ship. You see old salts with calloused hands meticulously carving their own dice from scraps of wood or bone, each one a unique, lopsided testament to boredom. The game is often crown and anchor, a deceptively simple game where you bet on symbols rather than numbers. A canvas laid out on the deck, marked with the titular crown and anchor, along with spades, clubs, hearts, and diamonds, becomes the gaming table. 3 dice, each adorned with the same symbols, are rolled. If your chosen symbol appears, you win. If it appears twice, you win double. 3 times, triple. The stakes are usually small, a portion of meager rations, a piece of tobacco, or sometimes, just the simple pride of victory. One evening, after the sun has dipped below the waves, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, you find yourself drawn to a small cluster of sailors huddled near a lantern, their faces illuminated by its flickering glow. Old Jack is there, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he shakes a small leather cup. He slams it down, revealing 3 anchors. A roar goes up from the other players, half groans of defeat, half cheers of excitement. Beginner's luck, Jack. Someone jokes. Jack just grins, collecting his winnings, a few precious coins that must have been hoarded for weeks. Beyond dice, cards are another staple. Decks, often worn thin and grimy from countless games and salty hands, are produced from hidden pouches. Games like whist or simpler variations of poker are common. And the rules might be a bit fuzzy, passed down through oral tradition and adapted to suit the mood, but the objective is always the same: distraction, camaraderie, and the chance to win something, however small. You learn quickly that cheating, though tempting, is rarely tolerated. A quick, sharp smack to the back of the head from a shipmate or a stern word from the bosun usually puts an end to any sly maneuvers. After all, on a ship, trust and a semblance of fairness are paramount for maintaining order and morale. One fascinating, lesser-known historical tidbit about these games is that sometimes, when actual playing cards were scarce, sailors would create their own. Imagine painstakingly drawing and painting each card by hand on scraps of parchment or even stiffened canvas. This goes beyond mere entertainment. It speaks to the deep human need for structured play, for a way to impose order and predictability onto an otherwise chaotic and uncontrolled environment. You try your hand at a few games, at first clumsy and losing more often than not. But you learn, picking up the unwritten rules and the subtle tells of your shipmates. The clack of the dice, the slap of the cards, the low murmurs and occasional bursts of laughter, these sounds become a comforting backdrop to the otherwise quiet nights. They're not just games, they're a vital part of the ship's social fabric, a way to forge bonds, release tension, and momentarily forget the endless expanse of ocean outside. The academic world still debates the precise psychological impact of gambling on confined groups, but it's clear these small wagers provided a potent cocktail of thrill, hope, and a much-needed mental diversion from the relentless monotony of a long sea voyage. When the dice fall silent and the cards are put away, another, far older form of entertainment emerges from the shadows of the flickering lanterns: storytelling. On long voyages, words become currency, memories become treasures, and the human voice, a vessel for transporting minds far beyond the confines of the ship. You discover that almost every sailor, from the youngest deckhand to the oldest captain, carries a library of tales within them. As night deepens and the ship settles into its rhythmic sway, a small circle inevitably forms. Old Jack, naturally, is often at the center, his voice a low rumble, punctuated by the creak of the timbers and the distant rush of the waves. He's a master storyteller, capable of spinning yarns that transport you from the damp, salty air of the deck to bustling marketplaces in distant lands, or chillingly, to the icy grip of the ocean's darkest depths. You hang on to every word, captivated by his vivid descriptions, the way he modulates his voice, and the knowing pauses he inserts for dramatic effect. The stories range wildly. There are tales of home, nostalgic recollections of loved ones, familiar landscapes, and forgotten feasts. These bring a wistful melancholy to the air, a shared longing that binds the crew together. Then there are the adventure stories, exaggerated accounts of daring escapes, battles with pirates, or encounters with monstrous sea creatures. These are often met with knowing nods and boisterous laughter, each sailor probably having their own embellished version of a similar event, but the most popular, and perhaps the most potent, are the supernatural tales. Ghost stories, whispered just loud enough to be heard over the wind, about cursed ships, phantom sailors, and sirens luring men to their doom. One night, old Jack tells a chilling tale of the Flying Dutchman, a spectral ship doomed to sail the oceans forever, never making port. His voice drops to a near whisper as he describes the ghostly crew, their eyes hollow, their faces pale as death. You find yourself glancing nervously at the dark, turbulent waters beyond the rails, half expecting to see an eerie glow approaching through the fog. This collective experience of fear, shared in the safety of the group, paradoxically becomes a bonding experience, a way to acknowledge the vast, unknowable power of the sea while feeling a little less alone in its presence. It's a fascinating historical point that oral tradition was absolutely vital for preserving culture and history, especially among communities like sailors who were often illiterate or had limited access to written materials. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were living archives, passing down practical knowledge, social norms, and shared experiences from one generation of mariners to the next. Sometimes, you'd hear a story so fantastical, so outlandish, that you'd have to wonder if it was pure invention or if there was a tiny kernel of truth buried somewhere deep within. A more obscure fact is how often these stories incorporated local folklore from the various ports sailors visited, leading to a rich, cross-cultural tapestry of myths and legends circulating the globe long before widespread literacy. You also contribute, tentatively at first, sharing a childhood memory or a simple anecdote. The encouragement from the older sailors builds your confidence. You learn that a good storyteller isn't just someone who recounts events, but someone who can paint pictures with words, someone who can evoke emotions, someone who can make the mundane miraculous. Even today, historians still vigorously debate the precise origins of many famous nautical legends, questioning how much was rooted in genuine experience versus the collective human imagination battling the vast, terrifying emptiness of the sea. But one thing is clear, these storytelling nights were a lifeline, anchoring the sailors to their shared humanity and giving them a much-needed escape from the relentless sameness of life at sea. When stories and dice games ran their course, the relentless rhythm of the waves often found its echo in another, deeply ingrained human activity, music. On ancient vessels, music wasn't merely entertainment, it was a vital tool for coordination, an emotional release, and a profound expression of shared humanity. You quickly learn that a ship without song is a ship without a soul. The most common form of music on board were sea shanties. These weren't just catchy tunes, they were work songs, designed to synchronize effort during arduous tasks like hauling ropes, raising sails, or weighing anchor. You hear them everywhere. As you pull on a heavy line, a deep voice might start, "What shall we do with the drunken sailor?" And instantly, the rest of the crew responds with a booming chorus, pulling in unison to the beat. The rhythm helps you time your pull, making the exhausting labor feel a little lighter, a little more bearable. Old Jack, with his surprisingly strong baritone, often leads these, his voice cutting through the wind and waves, rallying the tired crew. There's a fascinating historical note about shanties, they varied significantly depending on the task. Hauling shanties were slower, for long, heavy pulls, while halyard shanties were faster, for hoisting sails quickly. It's a testament to the ingenuity of sailors that they developed such a nuanced system of functional music. It's a piece of common historical knowledge that these songs were essential for the practical operation of a sailing vessel, but a more obscure fact is how many shanties incorporated coded messages or subtle complaints about the officers, known only to the crew. Beyond the work, there was also music for pure pleasure. Instruments, often simple and hearty, would appear from makeshift cases. A fiddle or a flute might produce mournful, haunting melodies that seemed to perfectly capture the vast loneliness of the ocean. Sometimes, a sailor would produce a concertina or a banjo, filling the air with lively jigs and reels that got even the most stoic old salts tapping their feet. You see men who rarely speak suddenly come alive, their faces softened by the music, their eyes closed in quiet contemplation or sparkling with merriment. One evening, a young Scotsman, barely older than yourself, pulled out a small set of pipes. The sound, shrill and clear, cut through the night, carrying across the waves. It was a lament, a haunting melody that spoke of distant highlands and misty glens. For a moment, the entire ship fell silent, lost in the beauty and sorrow of the tune. It transported you, not just to Scotland, but to a universal feeling of longing and memory. It was a powerful reminder that beneath the rough exterior, these men carried complex inner lives, filled with longing, joy, and sorrow. The communal singing, the shared appreciation for a well-played tune, the spontaneous dances on the deck, these moments were precious. They were a collective exhale, a way to release the pent-up tension and monotony of life at sea. The academic world still debates the precise origins of many shanties, whether they evolved purely from work rhythms or incorporated elements from folk songs picked up in various ports. But there's no doubt that music, in all its forms, was an indispensable part of surviving the mental rigors of long voyages, turning isolated individuals into a cohesive, singing crew, helping them to find solace and even joy in the vast, indifferent ocean. With endless hours to fill and limited resources, the human drive to create found fertile ground even on the cramped decks of an ancient sailing ship. You begin to notice that many of the older sailors, old Jack among them, are rarely truly idle. Even when seemingly resting, their hands are often engaged in some form of intricate work, crafting. These aren't just hobbies, they're acts of quiet rebellion against the monotony, turning scraps into treasures and skill into solace. The most common craft you witness, almost an art form in itself, is knot tying. Not just the practical knots for sailing, reef knots, bowlines, cleat hitches, but elaborate, decorative knots. Sailors would spend hours meticulously braiding and weaving ropes into intricate patterns, creating fancy work. You see examples everywhere: intricate Turk's head knots around the ship's rails, complex mats woven from discarded twine, or delicate bell pulls adorned with multiple layers of precise knotting. Old Jack, with his gnarled fingers, can create patterns that seem impossibly complex, his movements fluid and precise, a silent testament to years of practice. He teaches you a few basic decorative knots, and you find a meditative quality in the repetitive motion, the feel of the rough rope against your skin, the gradual emergence of a beautiful pattern from a simple length of cord. It's a fascinating piece of common historical knowledge that sailors developed hundreds of different knots, each with a specific purpose. But a more obscure fact is how many of these decorative knots had symbolic meanings, offering protection, or good luck, or even discreetly carrying messages. The academic world still debates the exact origins of some of the more complex sailors' valentines, intricate shell art created in ports, but it highlights the pervasive nature of this creative impulse even when away from the ship. Beyond ropes, other materials found new life. You see sailors carving small figures from scraps of wood or bone, using improvised tools like a sharpened nail or a piece of broken glass. These carvings might be simple birds, fish, or even miniature ships, often incredibly detailed despite the crude implements. Sometimes, you'd spot a sailor meticulously sketching in a small, worn notebook, capturing the endless expanse of the ocean or the familiar faces of his shipmates. These were rare treasures, often kept hidden, a private world on a public deck. One afternoon, you watch a quiet, introspective sailor painstakingly repairing a tear in his canvas jacket, but not just mending it. He's stitching a small, stylized whale onto the patch, using brightly colored threads he must have bartered for in a previous port. It's a small, personal touch that transforms a mundane repair into a unique piece of art, a silent declaration of individuality in a uniform world. These acts of crafting weren't merely about filling time, they were about maintaining a sense of purpose and identity. In an environment where personal space was non-existent and tasks were dictated, creating something with your own hands offered a rare sense of control and accomplishment. It allowed sailors to transform the harsh realities of their existence into objects of beauty and meaning, proving that even in the most challenging environments, the human spirit yearns to create. In the vast, isolating expanse of the ocean, where human interaction could become stale and repetitive, the presence of animal companions on board offered a unique and often profound source of comfort and amusement. You quickly learn that a ship wasn't just a vessel for cargo and crew, it was a floating microcosm of life, often including a surprising array of creatures. The most common, of course, were cats. Ship's cats were invaluable. They weren't just furry friends, they were crucial for pest control, keeping the ship free of rats and mice that could chew through ropes, contaminate food, and spread disease. But beyond their practical utility, these feline crewmates provided endless hours of entertainment. You'd watch them stalk a stray insect, chase a rolling piece of twine, or simply curl up for a nap in a patch of sun, their purrs a soothing counterpoint to the constant creaking of the ship. Many sailors formed deep bonds with these cats, sharing their meager rations and finding a silent, comforting presence in their furry companionship. It's a common historical fact that cats were almost universally present on long voyages for rodent control. A more obscure tidbit, however, is that some superstitious sailors believed that cats falling overboard caused storms, or that a cat sneezing was a good omen. Sometimes, there would be dogs too, though less frequently due to their larger size and dietary needs. These might be a captain's beloved pet or a working dog trained for specific tasks. Their playful antics, their loyal presence, and their sheer joy at a simple scratch behind the ears could lift spirits on the bleakest of days. You recall seeing a gruff, seemingly humorless bosun break into a rare smile as his scruffy terrier nudged a ball of rope towards him for a game of fetch on the swaying deck. Then there were the more unexpected companions. Birds, especially parrots or canaries, were sometimes kept in cages. Their bright plumage and cheerful chirping brought a splash of color and sound to the gray monotony. Parrots, with their ability to mimic human speech, could be a source of endless amusement and surprise. You might hear a gruff sailor swear under his breath, only for a parrot to squawk the same curse back at him a moment later, much to the amusement of the rest of the crew. One particular memory stands out. A small monkey, likely acquired at a bustling port, became the ship's unofficial mascot for a time. It was a mischievous creature, forever stealing biscuits, swinging from the rigging, and generally causing delightful chaos. Its antics, though sometimes annoying, were a constant source of laughter, a much-needed injection of unadulterated joy into the daily grind. The academic world still discusses the ethics of keeping wild animals on ships, but for many sailors, these creatures were genuinely valued companions, offering unconditional affection and a vital connection to the natural world that was otherwise so distant. These animal shipmates provided a crucial emotional outlet. They offered companionship without judgment, a playful distraction from the grim realities, and a living, breathing connection to something outside the immediate human sphere. In their simple existence, they reminded the sailors of the life beyond the waves, and perhaps, of the enduring capacity for joy and innocence, even in the harshest of environments. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the ship became a tiny speck adrift in a sea of stars, the ancient mariners found a profound connection to something far grander than themselves, the cosmos. For them, the night sky wasn't just a beautiful spectacle, it was a map, a clock, and a silent companion. You soon learned that celestial navigation wasn't just a skill, it was a way to commune with the universe and momentarily forget the earthly confines of the ship. Old Jack, on his night watch, often calls you over. See that one? He rasps, pointing a gnarled finger towards a particularly bright star. That's Polaris, the North Star. Always there, always showing the way. He explains how, unlike other stars, Polaris remains almost fixed in the sky, a dependable beacon regardless of the ship's movement. He teaches you how to use a simple astrolabe or even just your hand to measure the height of the North Star above the horizon, a direct indicator of the ship's latitude. It's a crude method, but surprisingly effective, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. This reliance on the stars is a foundational piece of common historical knowledge about ancient and medieval navigation. Before the invention of accurate chronometers, celestial bodies were often the only reliable tools for determining a ship's position. But a more obscure fact is how sailors developed mnemonic devices and constellation-specific songs to remember star patterns, turning the night sky into a vast, celestial storybook they could read even without formal training. You spend hours on deck, staring upwards, trying to discern the intricate patterns Old Jack describes. The Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, Orion, these constellations, once just abstract shapes, now become familiar landmarks, guiding your gaze across the inky blackness. He teaches you how to estimate time by the movement of the stars, how to gauge the ship's direction even on cloudy nights when only a few major stars are visible. There's a quiet magic to it. A sense of tapping into ancient wisdom that connects you to generations of sailors who have looked up at the same sky and felt the same wonder. The silence of these moments is profound. The only sounds are the creak of the ship and the gentle lapping of the waves. Looking at the vastness of space, the problems of the small wooden vessel seem to shrink. Your personal boredom, the endless chores, the cramped quarters, they all fade in comparison to the sheer immensity of the universe unfolding above you. It's a moment of perspective, a humbling realization of humanity's small place in the grand scheme of things. The academic world still debates the precise level of astronomical knowledge possessed by various ancient seafaring cultures, particularly those like the Polynesians who navigated vast distances without advanced instruments, relying almost entirely on intricate star charts held in memory. But what is undeniable is that for these sailors, the stars were not just points of light, they were vital guides, sources of inspiration, and a powerful antidote to the psychological toll of isolation. They offered a connection to the infinite, a reminder that even in the middle of nowhere, they were part of something vast and ordered, guided by lights that had shone for millennia. Life aboard a ship, especially on long voyages, was a constant negotiation with scarcity. Food was often monotonous, preserved and unappetizing. So, the opportunity for a fresh meal, and the thrill of the chase, offered a welcome break from the routine. For many sailors, fishing wasn't just about sustenance, it was a blend of patience, skill, and the exciting prospect of an unexpected bounty from the deep. You observe how often a spare moment is seized for this activity. A simple line, often just a length of strong cord with a hook fashioned from a piece of metal or bone, is dropped over the side. Sometimes, a piece of old meat or hardtack serves as bait. The water, a seemingly empty expanse, holds secrets beneath its surface, and every tug on the line promises a fleeting connection to that hidden world. There's a quiet camaraderie that develops around fishing. Sailors would gather, silently watching the lines, offering whispered advice or sharing tales of the monstrous fish that got away. It was a moment of shared hope and anticipation. The successful catch, whether a shimmering mackerel or a sturdy cod, would be met with cheers, its freshness a luxurious contrast to the usual salted beef and ship's biscuit. These moments were often celebrations, and the fish would be cooked and shared, a rare and delicious deviation from the standard fare. It's a piece of common historical knowledge that fresh food was crucial in preventing diseases like scurvy, though the understanding of vitamins was still centuries away. But a more obscure fact is how some sailors developed an almost spiritual connection to the fish they caught, believing certain species brought good or bad luck, or even communicated with the spirits of the ocean. One particularly memorable afternoon, the air was still, and the ocean unusually calm, a perfect day for fishing. Old Jack, usually quite reserved, had a line out, his eyes fixed on the water. Suddenly, the line jerked violently. He roared, bracing himself against the rail, his muscles straining. The line cut through the water, leaving a silvery trail. Other sailors quickly gathered, shouting encouragement, some even abandoning their duties to watch. After a tense struggle, involving much grunting and the collective effort of a few men, a massive tuna was hauled onto the deck, its scales shimmering in the sunlight. It was a magnificent creature, big enough to feed the entire crew for a day, and its capture brought a wave of genuine excitement and feasting to the ship. This small adventure, the thrill of the catch, provided not just fresh protein but a much-needed psychological boost. It broke the monotony, introduced an element of unpredictability, and offered a tangible reward for patience. For many, it was a reminder that even in the vast, empty ocean, life teemed beneath the surface, offering moments of surprise and delight. The academic world still debates the precise economic significance of fishing on long-haul voyages versus its more profound role in maintaining crew morale and mental well-being, but its power to turn a dull day into a memorable one is undeniable. The ocean, for all its monotonous stretches of blue, is never truly static. It's a living, breathing entity, capable of immense calm and terrifying fury. And for sailors on a long voyage, the dramatic shifts in weather were a powerful antidote to boredom, transforming the ship from a dull floating prison into a stage for nature's grandest drama. You learn to read the subtle signs. The sudden drop in temperature, the shifting patterns of clouds, the change in the wind's whisper, each heralds an upcoming change. A perfectly calm, mirror-like sea, while beautiful, can be deceptively unsettling. These are the days where the ship barely moves, the sails hang limp, and the heat can be oppressive. Such periods of dead calm, or being becalmed, were historically dreaded almost as much as storms, as they meant slow progress, dwindling supplies, and prolonged exposure to the mental strain of inaction. It's a common historical fact that sailors often invoked various superstitions to conjure wind during these frustrating periods, sometimes even whistling for a breeze. A more obscure practice was the sacrifice of a lock of hair or a piece of cloth thrown overboard to appease the wind gods. Then, the mood shifts. The sky darkens, the wind picks up, and the gentle sway of the ship becomes a more pronounced roll. The first drops of rain, then a steady downpour, drumming a furious rhythm on the deck. A storm is brewing, and suddenly, everyone is alive. The lethargy vanishes, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Orders are shouted, sails are reefed, and the crew moves with a desperate, unified purpose. You find yourself clinging to ropes, the ship bucking like a wild horse, green waves crashing over the bow, washing the deck clean. The air crackles with energy, a mix of fear and exhilaration. Old Jack, in his element, his eyes shining, bellows commands over the roar of the wind. He seems to draw strength from the tempest, a master of his domain. You watch, awestruck, as the ship fights against the colossal waves, sometimes plunging into a trough so deep you think the sky has vanished, only to rise again, water streaming from its decks. It's terrifying, yes, but also undeniably exciting. It's a stark reminder of humanity's insignificance against the raw power of nature, but also of the incredible resilience of both the ship and the men who sail her. After the storm passes, the clear, washed air feels incredibly fresh. The sun, when it reappears, seems brighter, warmer. And the conversations that follow are animated, filled with recounts of near misses, incredible waves, and shared acts of courage. These aren't just discussions, they are vital debriefs, reinforcing bonds forged in shared adversity. The academic world still grapples with the long-term psychological effects of surviving such intense, life-threatening events, often linking them to both trauma and resilience. But for ancient sailors, these dramatic shifts in weather were often the only true events of a long voyage, providing vivid memories and breaking the endless, mind-numbing repetition of the daily grind. They were the moments where life was lived most intensely, and boredom was a forgotten concept. While the vastness of the ocean might offer little in the way of external stimulation, the human body itself became a potential source of both entertainment and necessary maintenance. With days stretching into weeks of minimal movement beyond essential duties, physical prowess and simple exercises became another vital tool in the battle against boredom and the ill effects of confinement. You observe that even the most gruff and seemingly lazy sailors find ways to stay active. It isn't always formal exercise, sometimes it's born from necessity or simply an excess of pent-up energy. You see men performing impromptu balancing acts on the rolling deck, testing their sea legs with a playful challenge. Others might engage in friendly wrestling matches, their grunts and laughter echoing across the deck, a rough and tumble way to release tension and bond with shipmates. These aren't professional bouts, just good-natured scuffles that often end in a heap of tangled limbs and shared amusement. There's a fascinating common historical knowledge point here. The physical demands of sailing in ancient times were immense. Sailors were athletes by necessity, constantly climbing, pulling, and enduring harsh conditions. Therefore, maintaining physical fitness wasn't just a leisure activity but a matter of survival. However, a more obscure fact is how some crews organized informal Olympic Games during particularly long stretches of fair weather, with events like mast climbing races, knot tying speed challenges, or even contests of strength like lifting heavy barrels. Old Jack, despite his age, still moves with surprising agility. He shows you how to climb the rigging efficiently, not just for speed, but for economy of movement, turning a chore into a kind of graceful ascent. He demonstrates simple stretching routines he's picked up over the years, movements that keep joints supple and muscles from seizing up in the damp, cold air. You notice other sailors practicing various skills, P.S. throwing a knife at a piece of driftwood, trying to perfect their aim, or meticulously sharpening their tools, the repetitive motion a form of active meditation. One sunny afternoon, a small group organizes an impromptu tug-of-war using a thick coil of spare rope. Two teams, grunting and straining, pull against each other, their faces red with effort and laughter. The losing team tumbles into a messy pile, amidst the good-natured jeers of the winners. It's a simple game, requiring no special equipment, but it generates an enormous amount of energy and camaraderie. For a brief period, the weariness lifts, replaced by the sheer joy of physical exertion and friendly competition. The academic world still debates the extent to which ancient sailors understood the physiological benefits of exercise, but their practices clearly show an intuitive understanding of its importance for both physical and mental well-being. These bursts of activity, whether spontaneous or organized, were critical for breaking the sedentary nature of much of the voyage, ensuring that the body remained as resilient as the mind. They were a powerful reminder that even when confined, the human spirit and body yearns for movement and challenge, turning the ship's deck into an unexpected gymnasium and a stage for human strength. When the grand dramas of storms or the thrill of a big catch weren't presenting themselves, solace on a long voyage often came from the most unexpected, and sometimes most basic, sources. For ancient mariners, simple pleasures, particularly those related to food and the powerful escape of dreams, became vital psychological anchors against the pervasive dullness. The daily rations were, by modern standards, incredibly monotonous and unappetizing. Hardtack, a brick-like biscuit so tough it could break teeth, salted meat, and perhaps some dried peas or beans formed the core of the diet. Fresh food was a rare luxury. Yet, you quickly learn that even these meager provisions could, under certain circumstances, become a source of immense satisfaction. The simple act of receiving your portion, of chewing slowly, savoring the saltiness of the beef or the unexpected softness of a rehydrated prune, became a ritual. On days when a ship's cook managed to concoct something slightly different, perhaps a stew with a few precious root vegetables saved from the last port, or a pudding made from flour and rendered fat, it was cause for quiet celebration. The shared enjoyment of a slightly better meal created a fleeting sense of communal contentment. It's a piece of common historical knowledge that nutrition on long voyages was dire, leading to widespread deficiencies and diseases. But a more obscure fact is how resourceful sailors became in improvising meals, sometimes even catching and eating small birds that landed on the rigging or supplementing their diets with seaweed. The scarcity made even the blandest food deeply appreciated. Beyond the immediate gratification of a meal, the most profound escape often came with the closing of eyes. Dreams were a nightly journey back to land, to loved ones, to familiar smells and sounds. You'd hear sailors quietly recounting their dreams the next morning, a walk through a green field, the taste of fresh bread, the embrace of a wife or child. These dreams weren't just random neurological firings, they were vital psychological releases, allowing the mind to wander freely, to revisit cherished memories, and to construct elaborate fantasies that temporarily erased the cramped, rocking reality of the ship. These nocturnal adventures were so potent that they often became topics of conversation, shared narratives that knitted the crew closer together in their collective longing. You, too, find yourself looking forward to sleep, not just for rest, but for the precious moments of mental freedom it offers. You dream of running through forests, of warm firesides, of faces you miss dearly. And waking up, though sometimes jarring, leaves a lingering warmth, a faint echo of the world you left behind and hope to return to. The academic world still debates the full extent of the psychological resilience mechanisms employed by ancient mariners, but it's clear that these seemingly simple pleasures, the rare enjoyment of food, the universal solace of sleep and dreams, played a crucial role. They allowed the sailors to momentarily transcend their harsh reality, to nourish both body and soul, and to keep the flicker of hope alive against the relentless, often soul-crushing, monotony of the open sea. Life on a ship, especially on a long voyage, was a delicate balance. While the previous chapters painted a picture of sailors finding ways to entertain themselves, it's crucial to remember that this wasn't a free-for-all. To prevent boredom from escalating into chaos, and to ensure the vessel's safe passage, strict disciplinary measures and a robust system of rules, both written and unwritten, were paramount. These weren't just about punishment, they were about maintaining order, preventing conflict, and ensuring the survival of everyone on board. The captain was the ultimate authority, his word law. But below him, the boatswain and other officers maintained day-to-day order. You quickly learned that subtle cues and knowing glances from the older salts could prevent you from crossing an invisible line. There was an understanding that while a certain amount of playful mischief was tolerated, outright disobedience or actions that jeopardized the ship or crew would be met with swift and severe consequences. One common historical knowledge point is that flogging, whipping, was a brutal but accepted form of punishment for serious offenses, though it varied in frequency and severity across different navies and merchant fleets. However, a more obscure fact is the concept of keel hauling, dragging a sailor under the ship's keel, which was a terrifying, often fatal punishment, though its actual practice was rare and largely phased out by the 18th century, becoming more of a mythical deterrent than a common reality. Academic historians still debate the precise effectiveness of these harsh punishments versus the more psychological tactics of maintaining discipline and morale. Beyond the formal punishments, there were many smaller, more immediate ways to enforce order. A stern reprimand, extra duties, or the loss of a rum ration were common consequences for minor infractions. But perhaps more potent was the social ostracism from your shipmates. On a vessel where every man depended on every other, earning the scorn or distrust of the crew was a truly isolating and terrifying prospect, far worse than any physical punishment. For many, you witness a moment where two young sailors, frustrated by the endless repetition, nearly come to blows over a petty disagreement. Before the fight can escalate, old Jack, without raising his voice, steps between them. His presence, combined with a quiet, firm warning, is enough to diffuse the tension. He reminds them, on this ship, we sink or swim together. There's no room for fighting amongst ourselves. His words carry weight, not just because of his experience, but because they articulate a fundamental truth of life at sea. Unity was survival. These disciplinary structures, even when unseen, permeated every aspect of shipboard life. They were a constant reminder of the hierarchical nature of the voyage and the absolute necessity of collective action. While some might see them as oppressive, for ancient sailors, they were a crucial framework that prevented the ship from descending into anarchy, allowing them to endure the long, boring, and often perilous journey towards their destination. After weeks, sometimes months, of nothing but the endless expanse of blue, the most anticipated words a sailor could hear would finally echo across the decks, "Land ahoy." This simple declaration was an immediate, powerful antidote to every ache of boredom, every pang of homesickness, every weariness of the soul. For you, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated euphoria. One hazy morning, as you stood on watch, squinting at the perpetually shimmering horizon, a cry pierced the pre-dawn quiet. "Land! Land on the starboard bow!" The voice belonged to a young lookout, his voice cracking with excitement. At first, you see nothing, just the familiar, vast emptiness. But then, as the sun begins to creep above the waterline, painting the sky in soft pastels, a faint smudge appears. A dark, indistinct line against the pale gold of the rising sun. It's almost imperceptible, a mere whisper of solidity in a liquid world. The news ripples through the ship like wildfire. Sleepy eyes instantly sharpen, weary faces break into grins. Suddenly, there's a burst of energy you hadn't seen in weeks. Sailors scramble up the rigging, eager for a better view, straining their eyes to catch the first unmistakable glimpse. The air fills with excited chatter, theories about which port it might be, what wonders it holds. The ship itself seems to pick up speed, drawn by an invisible magnet towards the distant shore. It's a common historical knowledge point that the sight of land after a long voyage was often accompanied by feasts and celebrations, a collective sigh of relief. A more obscure fact is that some captains would intentionally withhold information about approaching land until the very last moment, believing that the sudden, dramatic reveal would create a greater surge of morale and prevent restlessness from building too soon. Academic historians still debate the psychological impact of such surprise reveals versus a gradual, informed approach to impending arrival. As the hours pass, the smudge slowly grows clearer, taking on shape and definition. You start to distinguish the outlines of hills, then trees, and finally, the faint promise of human habitation. The smell of fresh earth, damp foliage, and even distant wood smoke begins to replace the familiar tang of salt and tar, a scent so intoxicating it makes your heart ache with longing. You imagine fresh water, solid ground beneath your feet, the vibrant colors of nature, and the cheerful din of a busy port. Old Jack stands beside you, a rare, soft smile on his weathered face. "Almost there, lad," he says, his voice tinged with a profound satisfaction. Almost there. The sight of land is more than just an endpoint, it's a validation of the entire grueling journey. It signifies the success of the voyage, the triumph over the elements, and the promise of temporary freedom from the endless rocking, the monotonous food, and the soul-crushing boredom that have been your constant companion for so long. The ship, once a prison, now feels like a triumphant chariot, carrying you towards salvation. The weariness that had settled deep in your bones begins to lift, replaced by a giddy anticipation of stepping onto firm ground once more. The moment the gangplank touched solid ground, a collective cheer erupted, and the rush of sailors eager to disembark was almost palpable. Stepping off the ship after weeks or months at sea is a sensation unlike any other. The world, which had been in constant motion, suddenly feels utterly, wonderfully stable. You find your legs wobbling, adjusting to the firm, unmoving earth beneath your feet. It's a small detail, but profoundly disorienting and liberating all at once. This is port life, a temporary, intoxicating taste of freedom and sensory overload. The bustling sounds hit you first, the cacophony of vendors hawking their wares, the chatter of unfamiliar languages, the laughter from taverns, the creak of carts on cobbled streets. Then the smells, fresh bread, exotic spices, wood smoke, sweat, and something indefinable, yet distinctly not the ocean. Your senses, dulled by the monotony of the ship, are suddenly overwhelmed, and it's glorious. For sailors, port was a time for three essential things: resupply, revelry, and release. The ship needed fresh water, provisions, and repairs. But the crew needed more. They needed to spend their meager wages, to forget the hardships of the voyage, and to reconnect with the world beyond the ship's rails. Taverns, with their warm light and loud music, were the first destination for many. Here, you could indulge in fresh food, perhaps a roasted chicken or a crisp apple, things that tasted like pure luxury after weeks of hardtack and salted meat. The ale flowed freely, lubricating conversations, turning weary sailors into boisterous storytellers. It's a piece of common historical knowledge that port towns, especially those frequented by sailors, were often rough and tumble places, filled with a mix of legitimate trade, entertainment, and sometimes, less savory activities. A more obscure fact is how sailors developed elaborate systems of secret handshakes and codes to identify safe havens or trustworthy establishments in foreign ports. A crucial skill for navigating unfamiliar and potentially dangerous environments. The academic world still debates the extent to which these shore leaves truly rejuvenated sailors or merely offered a brief, often chaotic, distraction before the next leg of the journey. You see sailors engaging in all manner of activity. Some are getting long overdue haircuts and shaves, transforming their sea-weathered appearances. Others are bartering for small trinkets to bring home to loved ones, a piece of colorful fabric, a unique shell, a carved wooden figure. There's a desperate energy to it, as if everyone is trying to cram weeks of missed experiences into a few precious days. You find yourself wandering through narrow streets, marveling at the sights and sounds, the sheer variety of human life. You might buy some fresh fruit, its sweet juice a burst of pure joy after the bland ship's diet. Old Jack, too, makes his way into town, though with a quieter demeanor. He might find a quiet corner in a tavern, sipping his ale, observing the scene with a knowing smile. He knows this freedom is fleeting, a brief interlude before the next call to sea. But for now, it's a vital release valve, allowing the pressure of confinement to escape. These days in port are a psychological reset, a chance to briefly forget the rocking deck, the endless blue, and the gnawing boredom, and to recharge before the next great challenge of the open ocean. The sounds of the waves begin to soften now, becoming a gentle, rhythmic hush, like a lullaby woven by the ocean itself. The distant echoes of laughter from the bustling port slowly fade, replaced by the quiet whisper of the wind through the rigging of a ship far out at sea. You're no longer on the swaying deck, nor are you amidst the vibrant chaos of a foreign port. Instead, you're drifting, effortlessly, on a calm, silvery sea under a sky dusted with 1,000 sleepy stars. The journey has ended, not with a jolt, but with a gentle sigh. All the adventures, the challenges, the boredom, and the boundless courage of those ancient mariners have become mere echoes on the breeze. Let their stories, their resilience, and their quiet determination guide you now, not to new shores, but to the deep, peaceful embrace of slumber. Feel the last remnants of tension release from your shoulders, your breath evening out, becoming as calm and steady as the tide. The vast ocean, once a symbol of endless waiting, now cradles you in its timeless rhythm, lulling you deeper, deeper, into a soft, dreamless sleep.